October 1885. A supply town on the Musselshell River in the heart of Montana Territory. Inside the mercantile, a cattleman leaned on the counter, watched a thin woman in a mended coat count out her coins, and said it loud enough for every man by the stove to hear. No decent woman raises children in a hole in the rock. The laughter went around the room like a passed bottle. The woman finished counting. Nails, salt, a tin of matches, cartridges for a second-hand rifle. She gathered her sack, nodded to the storekeeper, and walked out into the wind without a word. Her name was Ellen Casey. She was 31 years old, she was a widow, and she was about to move her 2 children into a cave. That is how the old-timers along the Musselshell told the story for 50 years, and they told it because of what came after. 16 months later, the worst winter in the recorded history of the northern plains fell on Montana and killed cattle by the hundreds of thousands. When it was over, the woman in the hole in the rock had come through warmer than any family in the county, and nobody laughed at Ellen Casey again. To understand why she did it, you have to understand what she was standing in that October. Ellen and her husband Michael had come out from Wisconsin in 1883, chasing the boom that followed the railroad. Michael cut cordwood and hauled logs for the new ranches, and they filed a homestead claim where a spring creek broke out of the sandstone rimrocks, a bench of good grass under a wall of yellow rock, where they meant to build properly when the money came. In June of 1885, on a downhill grade, a load of green logs shifted on Michael's wagon, and the men who brought him home carried their hats in their hands. Ellen buried him on the bench above the creek, her son Thomas, 11, holding the shovel, her daughter Mary, 6, holding her skirt. Everything she had left came to $11.40. 1 milk cow, a crate of hens, and 160 acres of Montana that did not care whether her family lived or died. Now do the arithmetic she had to do that summer, because this is the part the men in the store never bothered to do. Sawn lumber cost around $40 a thousand board feet at the railhead, and freighting it out to her bench would nearly double it. A log cabin needed a team, a strong man on the other end of a crosscut saw, and weeks of daylight she no longer had. Hired help wanted cash wages, and cash was the one crop her claim had never grown. She wrote to her sister back in Wisconsin, and the answer said times were hard there too. There was no back door out of Montana, and a canvas tent against a Montana January is not a home. It is a shroud that flaps. Whatever was going to save her children, she would have to build herself with her own hands before the snow flew. Her claim held one asset no surveyor had ever priced. In the rimrock above the creek, facing due south, there was a cave, a sandstone alcove maybe 14 feet deep, 10 or 11 wide, tall enough at the mouth for a grown man to stand. Wind and water had spent thousands of years hollowing it out of the soft stone. Sheepherders had camped in it, and people had sheltered in that rock long before there was a territory to file on. She understood the place the first time she stood in it during a north wind. Outside, the gusts staggered her. Inside, 3 steps past the mouth, the air barely moved, and the low autumn sun lay warm on the back wall. A widow with $11 stood there and made the decision the county would mock for a year and study for a generation. In September, she struck the tent and pitched it at the cave mouth, and the work began. The first job was the floor of fallen rubble, slabs and chunks the size of stove lids, sloping out toward the daylight. For 3 weeks, she and Thomas worked shovel and pry bar, rolling the big pieces out to the ledge and saving the flattest slabs in a pile, like coins. Then came the floor, made of rock and packed rubble, uneven and tilted. She chopped the high spots with a mattock, hauled clay up from the creek by the bucket, spread it, wetted it, and tamped it with the butt of a fence post until her shoulders shook. Into the wet clay near the entrance, she bedded her saved slabs, flat side up, a hearth apron, and a door sill a broom could sweep clean. The mouth of the cave gaped wider than any door, and that gap was where winter would come in. So Ellen Casey taught herself masonry. She laid up a front wall from the fallen sandstone, fitting slab over joint, and at first she laid it dry, stone on stone, the way it looked in pictures. The first hard frost of October heaved the ground under one corner, and a shoulder-high section bulged and slid in the night. She looked at the ruin of a week's work in the cold morning, tore the wall down to the dirt, and started over, and the second wall she built like a woman who did not intend to be corrected twice. She dug the footing down to solid rock. She made the base 2 stones thick, battered the face inward as it rose, and every arm's length she laid a long through stone across the full width to tie the 2 skins together. Between the courses went mortar she mixed herself, creek clay and sand, and chopped dry grass, the grass doing the work that hair does in plaster. That wall was standing plumb decades later, and old masons brought their apprentices out from town just to look at it. They said somebody must have taught her. Nobody had. The first wall had. Into the wall went a door frame and 1 window, and both were salvage. Years before, a freight wagon had wrecked at the crossing downstream, and its stripped oak boards had seasoned in the sun ever since. Ellen and Thomas pried them loose and packed them home. The door she built double, 2 layers of planks with dried grass packed between them for warmth, hung on hinges cut from Michael's old harness leather. For the window, she made the hardest trade of that autumn. Her black Sunday dress, the last fine thing she owned from Wisconsin, went to a freighter's wife in town, and back came a 4-pane glass sash. She set it beside the door, facing south, where the low winter sun would pour through it all day. She said later that the dress had never once kept anybody warm. Smoke is the thing that kills people in closed-up shelters, and Ellen knew it. Here the cave offered her a gift, but she had to earn it. At the back of the chamber, the ceiling rose into a dark seam, a natural crack running up through the rimrock. She held a smoldering rag beneath it and watched the ribbon of smoke crawl along the stone, find the seam, and vanish upward. The fissure vented clean to the top of the bluff. She spent days with a cold chisel and a hand sledge widening the bottom of that seam into a throat, and built a collar of flat stones and clay around it, funneling down to meet a stovepipe. The stove was a small, second-hand cast-iron box with a cracked lid, bought for $2, mended with ash paste, and hauled 12 miles in a borrowed wagon. On the bluff top, she stacked a loose ring of flat stones over the crack's outlet, open enough to draw, tight enough to break sparks and shed rain. The first fire smoked her out of her own cave because the fissure held a plug of heavy, cold air. She learned the trick every dugout family on the plains learned sooner or later. Burn a twist of dry grass in the throat first, warm the flue, get the air climbing, and then light the stove. From that day forward, the little stove drew as steady as a lamp. One wall of the cave wept. A slow seep of groundwater slicked the sandstone on the shaded side, and in the mild days of October, she paid it no mind, and that was her second mistake. The first hard cold of November 1885 turned the seep into a sheet of ice, creeping across half her new floor, and it grew back as fast as she chipped it away. She took it the way she took everything that year, as the rock teaching her the rules. With chisel and hatchet, she cut a shallow channel along the base of the wet wall and lined it with tamped clay, giving the water somewhere to want to go. The channel ran to a small basin she pecked out of the floor stone near the door, and the overflow slipped away through a gap under the sill. All winter, the seep trickled obediently along its gutter, and Ellen Casey had what almost nobody on the bench had, water indoors that never froze more than a skin. Old-timers swore her indoor spring never quit. That first winter, the winter of 1885 and 1886, was mild by Montana's grading, and it served as her schoolroom. She found every draft with a wet finger and killed it, rags and clay around the window frame, a sand-filled sock against the door sill, a canvas curtain hung partway back to shrink the sleeping space, because a small room is a cheap room to heat. And she noticed the thing that mattered most. Hours after the fire died, the stones stayed warm, and at dawn the room had barely cooled. She was not living in a hole. She was living inside a stove. Through the summer of 1886, she improved her position like a soldier expecting a siege. In the back corner, a pocket of rock stayed cool, and even in all weathers, and she shelved it with wagon boards and made it her cellar and larder in one. Potatoes and turnips went in banked in dry sand, along with dried venison, choke cherries, and eggs packed down in salt. Outside, against the base of the bluff, she and Thomas built the cow a shed of posts and brush, backed against the south-facing rock and banked with earth on the weather side, and they cut wood as if the winter had written them a letter. Cottonwood and box elder deadfall from along the creek, bucked and split and hauled all summer, 4 full cords stacked dry under the overhang beside the cave mouth, kindling boxed inside, and sacks of dried cow chips besides. The summer of 1886 was itself a warning. Drought sat on the territory, the grass cured brown in July, and springs failed that had never failed. Still, the ranges were crowded because the cattle boom had packed Montana with more animals than the ground could carry. The old hands read the signs out loud that fall: muskrat lodges built double thick on the sloughs, beavers caching deep, birds gone south early, hard winter coming, they said. Ellen believed them. She stacked hay for the cow until her hands split, and she bought cartridges instead of coffee. The snow came in November of 1886 and did not melt, and more came behind it, each storm colder than the last. Through December, the drifts climbed over the fence lines. In January of 1887, the temperature went down like a dropped blade until the thermometers that could still be trusted read 40 below zero, and men swore it went colder on the open benches. Trees split in the night with cracks like rifle shots, and iron latches burned bare skin. Then came the cruelest trick of that winter. A false Chinook breathed warm across the range for a day or two and softened the top of the snow, and when the cold slammed back down, the whole country was sheathed in an iron crust that no hoof could break. The cattle could not reach the grass beneath it. They drifted with the storms until they fetched up against fences and cut banks, and there they starved and froze by the tens of thousands. History wrote that winter down as the Great Die-Up, and Montana's open ranges were never run the same way again. A mile down the creek from Ellen's Rimrock lived the Pratt family, and the Pratts had done everything the right way. A proper log cabin raised that very summer of green logs cut in the spring. But green logs shrink as they dry, and as that terrible January tightened, the shrinking logs pulled away from their chinking and open seams to the wind. The stove glowed cherry red while the water pail froze solid 6 feet from it. Frost furred the inside of the walls, and every nailhead wore a white beard. Their youngest child began to cough, the deep chest cough that frightened every frontier mother. John Pratt ran the arithmetic of his woodpile against the calendar, and it came out short of April. A cabin that leaks wind does not just make you cold. It eats your fuel, then your stock, then your children, in that order. In the cave, those same nights ran differently. The little cracked lid stove burned low, and even, drawing steady up its stone throat, 2 armloads of wood a day. It held the room near 60 degrees, while the night outside was 100 degrees colder. The children did their sums on a slate by lamplight, bread rose under a cloth by the hearth, and the cow chewed in her banked shed. The rock walls soaked up the stove's heat all evening and gave it back all night, so that dawn in Ellen Casey's cave was warmer than noon in half the cabins in the county. On a night at the end of January, a lantern came bobbing up the creek trail through the blowing snow. It was the Pratts, all 5 of them, John carrying the baby inside his coat, ice in his beard, his wife's hands too frozen to knock. Ellen opened the door, and the warm air rolled out past her like steam off a kettle. "Come in then," she said, and stood aside. As the story was told along the Musselshell, that was the entire speech she made. 7 people wintered in the cave from that night on. John Pratt hauled wood and broke trail and hunted with Thomas, and his wife worked beside Ellen, and the children slept in a warm row behind the canvas curtain like loaves in a pan. Nobody froze, and nobody's cough settled into their chest. The cave did not care how many it held. More people simply meant more warmth, and the woodpile fell slower than anyone could believe. Spring came at last, and it came ugly. The thaw uncovered dead cattle by the thousand in the coulees, and on some ranges 9 animals in 10 were gone. Great cattle companies, run on borrowed money and paper confidence, broke that spring and never rose again. A cowboy up north asked how the herd was doing, mailed the owners a small sketch of one starved cow hunched in the snow, and the drawing became the most famous picture of the disaster. And through all of it, on one bench above one creek, a widow with 6 children in her care had come through warm on 2 armloads of wood a day. The county's tune changed key. The cattleman from the mercantile rode past that march, saw her smoke standing straight in the cold air, and stopped to warm himself. He drank her coffee, looked a long time at the stone wall, the water gutter, and the stove throat cut into living rock, and said very little. Before summer, men were riding out to ask how the flue drew and how the gutter ran. Nobody said the cave woman anymore. They said Mrs. Casey, and they took their hats off when they said it. So why did it work? There was no miracle in it, just physics that a shovel can reach. Go down below the frost line, and the ground in that country holds close to 50 degrees Fahrenheit all year round, day and night. Ellen's cave sat wrapped inside that steadiness. In the deadliest week of the die-up winter, her walls never fell far below 50, so her stove only ever had to lift the room 20 degrees. The Pratt stove was being asked to lift their cabin 100 through walls that leaked like a basket. The rock itself was a battery. Tons of dense sandstone wrapped the room, soaking up every spare degree, while the fire burned and releasing it slowly after, so the cave rode through the night without a single cold hour. That is heat capacity, the same reason a warmed stone stays hot in your pocket, and the wind, the true murderer of the plains, never got inside at all. A log cabin in a gale swaps its whole volume of warm air for outdoor air many times an hour through its seams, and every one of those swaps has to be reheated from 40 below. The cave had one tight door, one tight window, and a mountain behind everything else. Add the small space, one room instead of a whole house, and the drifts that sealed the bluff under a blanket of trapped air, and the ledger is simple. The cabin fought the winter all night long, and the cave mostly ignored it. Ellen Casey spent, all told, less than $20 turning a hole in the rock into the warmest house in that county's memory. The story says she raised a frame house years later when the children were grown and lumber was cheap, and kept the cave as her cellar, and that in the worst cold snaps of her old age, she would still carry her quilt down the path and sleep where the rock stayed steady. The rock had kept her children alive, and she never pretended otherwise. But hers is not the only story of a builder who was laughed at first and proven right by a killing winter. In 1880, in Dakota Territory, a Norwegian bachelor started digging his livestock barns straight down into a hillside, and the neighbors joked that he was digging a grave for his own cattle. Then came the legendary snow winter of 1880 and 1881, the winter that stopped the trains for months, and his grave in the ground became known as the warmest barn in the territory. That story is next, so subscribe now and make sure you do not miss it.